Hi all, this is the second part of building a quiz application with React.js, ASP.NET Core Web API and Material UI. If you haven't watched the first part, please watch that first. I have given the link in video description and inside the iCard top right corner. So let's start where we stopped in previous video. Now there is one thing that you must know about Context API. The values inside the Context API will be lost once you reload the application like this here. See, the participant ID is reset to its initial value. So how can we preserve the Context API value across the application? Now let's look why it is not working after the page reload and how we can fix the problem. First of all, we have saved the data inside this component React component state object context. So data saved in any React component state object will be lost after the corresponding page reload. And this context provider or Context API only share the data that is provided here to its children components here. So both of these state object and Context API does nothing to preserve data across page reloads. In order to fix this problem, there is a storage facility in web browsers called local storage. We can actually see the data saved in local storage through web browser dev tools. I will show you that in a bit. Before that, let's briefly discuss how we can make use of this local storage. First of all, in order to save a data, we can make use of this method setItem. As a first argument, we have to pass a key to uniquely identify the data that we have saved. And as a second parameter, we have to pass a JSON string corresponding to the data. In order to retrieve the data, we can make use of the method getItem. So it will return the data saved inside the key provided here. Finally, in order to remove a data stored in local storage, we can call this method removeItem. So that's all you need to know to work with local storage. So let's integrate local storage into this application. So first of all, anything that we want to save inside this context state object, we will save that first inside this local storage here. So we could do this local storage dot set item. I will use this key context. Now here we have to pass the data in JSON string format. For that we can make use of this method JSON stringify. Now let's pass this default data here. We only need to initialize the local storage with this default object for the first time. So first of all, we will check whether we have an existing local storage for the context. Now with this method getItem, we can check what is inside this key context. We will only initialize the local storage if this context is not already occupied. So we can check that by comparing it with null. So basically this function is used to initialize the context object here. So we have to return the actual data here. So we will provide that from this local storage here. And don't forget this, the data stored inside the local storage is in JSON string format. So we have to convert that into an object with this method JSON parse. So this method will return existing data from local storage for initializing the state object after each time we reload the application. Now we have to do one more thing. From various parts of the application, we can modify this context with this function setContext, right? So whenever that happens, we have to make the same changes inside this context here also. For that, we can make use of this hook useEffect. As a first parameter, we can have this callback function, and this function will be invoked whenever there is a change inside the second parameter here. So as a second parameter inside this array, we will pass this state object context. So whenever there is a change inside this context, this callback function will be invoked. During that time, we will update the local storage. The updated value will be there inside this context. So we'll save the corresponding JSON string in local storage. So throughout the application, Context API data is saved inside the local storage in real time. As per our Context API configuration here, the data or the default context must be saved inside the local storage. In order to see the data saved in local storage, you can go to this tab application. So here we have the key and here we have the JSON string, and you can see the corresponding JSON object here. Now participant ID is 0. Now let's try to log in with the existing participant. That's it. Participant ID is updated to 1, and here we are inside the quiz route. Now enough with the Context API or router or login form. Now let's go ahead with this quiz component, which is the meat of this application. So first of all, inside this quiz component, we have to fetch the questions that we have inside our DB. Now using this question controller here, we'll be picking random 5 questions using this getWeb method here, API /question. So first of all, we need a customized query here. So first of all, I'll be creating this variable random 5 questions. And we have to do this through async operations. So I will use the prefix avoid underscore context can be used to query the database. And here we have the collection of questions. Now we will make this selection here. Apart from selecting columns as it is, we want some customization here also. So question ID is equal to the actual question ID itself. Then question in words. Image name. Now here is the difference. We have 4 options and I want to return them as an array called options. Now in order to return them as an array of strings, we could do this. We'll be creating a separate array with those options. So that's it. We don't need to return the answer of this question. That will be done later. Now here comes the random selection. You can call this method order by, and we are going to order this in a random order. With that we can make use of this class guide. We can call this method new guide. So the questions inside the table will be ordered in a random order, and from that we will take first 5 questions. Now finally we have to convert this to a list. Now let's return the same here, random 5 questions. This project is already running without debug mode here. Now in order to reflect these new changes, we just need to build this project. For that, go to build, then build solution, or you can use this shortcut Ctrl+Shift+B. So project is successfully built. Now in order to check the proper working of this web API method, you can use this Swagger interface here. So here we have the component question and we want to make a request to this web API method. So click on try it out. Now click on execute. Boom, that's it. Here we have the server response with the code 200, meaning response went successfully. And here we can see the random 5 questions and the options is returned as we expected in an array. Now we have to make this same request from this quiz component here. And we want to do that after completely loading this component. With that, we can make use of this default hook use effect. Here we have the callback, and as a second parameter we have to pass an empty array. So the callback here will be executed once this component is fully loaded. And here we have to make the GET request. Now we can make use of this API function create API endpoint. As a parameter to this function we have to pass the endpoint. So I will save the corresponding here question. So this will be concatenated with the base URL and this API here. Now let's pass the same here, endpoints.question. Now here we have to make the GET request. For that we can make use of this function fetch. Here we have the success and error callback. Now in order to store the random questions returned from the server, I'm going to create a state object questions. Let's initialize that with an empty array. Now once we receive the random questions from the server, we can update that here, response.data. Let's print the same into developer console. Reload the application again. Now let's check the console tab. That's it. Here we have the 5 random questions. Now let's look how to show these questions one at a time inside this quiz component here. So first of all, we'll make sure the questions array is populated with the server response. We'll be showing the questions if the length of the array is not equal to 0. Else we'll be returning null here. Now for displaying the question, I'll be using the Material UI component card. Inside that we have to show the card content. Here we have the typography component for showing the question in words. Variant is equal to h6, so it is similar to an h6 header. Now here we have to show this property question in words. Before that, we need another variable to represent the current question that we are dealing with. Inside this response, we have 5 questions. In order to identify which question we are currently showing inside the component, we need an index to keep track of the current question. For that, I will be creating a state object question index. Let's initialize that with 0. Now we could do this questions and let's pass the index here. Now here we have to show the property question in words. Back to the application, reload this page. That's it. Here we have the question. Now we can list options of this question. For that, I'm going to use Material UI component list. To learn more about this component, you can go through the documentation here. So here we have the outer component list. Now for each option we have, we'll be showing this component list item button. We have 4 options. I will render them with the map function here. So here we have the corresponding question. Inside that we have an array options. Now we can call the map function. this callback has two parameters. First of all, the item itself and then the index. Inside the callback, we will return this list item button. First of all, I want to disable the ripple effect. So we'll set this property disable ripple. Since we are rendering this component in a loop, we have to set this key property with a unique value. I will be passing the index here. Now here we have to show the option. I will show that inside a div, HTML div, and the option is inside the parameter item. Now let's check that here. Boom, that's it. So here we have 4 options. Now along with these options, I want to show the alphabets A, B, C, and D. So I will do that with the Unicode. First of all, I will call this method string method from char code. Now here we have to pass the Unicode of capital letter A, which is 65. So this function will convert Unicode 65 into capital letter A. Now for second option, we need B as a prefix. Then C, so the Unicode letter must increment on each iteration here. For that, I will add the index. So it will work as we expect. Now let's concat a colon here. Now I want to make this prefix in bold, so I will be using this B tag here. Now let's style this card component. First of all, I will set the width to some fixed value. Now in order to center them horizontally, I will set the horizontal margin MX as auto. Now we need some top margin, so we can do this margin top of the range 5. Now let's show some heading for this card here. For that we can make use of this component card header. Here we have the property title and this will be shown inside the header. Here I want to show question X of 5. So here we go, question. Let's concat the question number here. Let's save this back to the application. So here we have the card header. Each time we reload this page here, we will get different questions because we are randomly selecting the 5 questions. Now along with this title here, I want to show a timer. For that, first of all, I'll be creating a state object time taken. Let's initialize that with 0. Now in order to start the timer, I will be creating a separate function, start timer. Now we can call this JavaScript function setInterval. So as a first parameter, we'll be having this callback function. And then as a second parameter, here we have to pass the time in milliseconds, 1000 milliseconds here, similar to 1 second. So after each 1 second, this callback function will be invoked. And this is where we are incrementing this time taken property. It is actually representing the seconds elapsed. So we could do this set time taken. We just need to increment the time taken like this. But there is a problem with this approach here. This set function for state object is an asynchronous function and it is getting invoked after each seconds. If we try to increment this property on each seconds, the previous increment operation might not be completed before the next increment. So instead of this, it would be better to use the callback function inside the set function like this. So here we have the parameter previous value and we'll increment the previous value with 1. So this callback parameter previous represent the previous value and I think this will wait for the previous set operation to complete. So after each second, this time taken property is getting incremented second by second. Now let's start this timer as soon as we got the question from the server. So I will do that here. Now we need to do one more thing. Whenever we create or configure a set interval operation here, we need to suspend this operation when we're done with the counter. For that, I will be creating a variable called timer. The set interval function returns a reference to the created timer and that can be assigned here. Now as I mentioned before, this use effect with this array, empty array as a second parameter is represent component did mount event, meaning this callback function is getting invoked once the component is completely loaded. Now if we return a function here like this function will get invoked whenever we leave this component, for example navigating to next component, result, or reloading the application, etc. So this is the perfect place to suspend the timer that we have created. For that, we can call this function clear interval. Inside that, we just need to pass the timer reference. So inside this property, we have the seconds taken by the participant. Now we want to show that inside this card header. I will show that with this property action within this typography component. Instead of showing the time taken in seconds, we have to format them in proper time format. For that, I'm going to create a separate folder called helper. Inside that, let's create this index.js. And here I will paste the function for converting into proper time format. So this represents the minutes and this represents the seconds. In between them we have a colon. Now let's call this function inside the component here. Now let's check how it works. So it is working as we expected. Now I want to align this timer with this title here. For that we have to add some custom CSS. So let's inspect this element here. We can make use of this class MUI card header action. So let's copy it back to the component. Here we already have some custom CSS. So let's add the corresponding styles here and represent this outer card component so that we have this class representing the typography here. Now in order to center that element, we can do this. First of all, we'll set the margin as 0. Now let's set this align self as center. So that's done. Here we have another problem. I think we have misspelled this property. Basically, I was just trying to disable this effect here, this ripple effect. You know what? Just don't bother. Let's remove the property here. Now, in order to separate this card header from this card content here, I'm going to use this material UI component progress. We'll be showing a progress bar like this, indicating how much questions attended by the participant. For that, in between this card header and this card content, first of all, we need a box which is similar to the div in our plain HTML. Now let me copy this component from here. Now here we have to provide the value in percentage. So I will do this. First of all, we need the question number. So question index plus 1 divided by 5. Resulting value indicate how much fractions of the total question is completed. In order to convert this into percentage, we will multiply this numerator with 100. Boom, that's it. Now, when users select an option from here, we want to show the next question, right? And we want to save the selected option along with the corresponding question ID. And that's all we need for the final score calculation. So first of all, let's add a click event to the list item here. So here we have the on click event. To this event function, we have to pass few parameters. So I will call the function inside another arrow function here, update answer. First of all, we have to pass the question ID. So let me copy this and pasting here, question ID. And then the index of the option, it's there inside this parameter IDX. Now let's define this function up above. We have two parameters, question ID and option index. First of all, let's update the selected option with the corresponding question ID. We can save that inside this array, context API array selected options. First of all, let's destructure what we have inside the context object and corresponding set function set context. Now we can call the hook use state context. So inside this context object, we have the array selected options. Into that, we can just push an object with the question ID and the selected option index. So question ID is equal to question ID parameter. We can simplify this syntax like this. And then we have the selected index. So I will pass the option index here. Now there is a problem for doing this because this state object is immutable. We can't directly update the state object context here. It's immutable. So instead of doing this, first of all, I will copy the array here. Let's destructure the array. And this is how we copy an existing array. Now let's call this push method from this copied array. Now finally we can update the context with this function set context. Into this function we just need to pass an object with updated property value. So selected options array must be updated with these new values. Now along with this we have to increment this question ID here. For that we could do this set question index. Let's increment it to the next index. Now inside the context API, we have to update the time taken for this quiz program. And we will update this property time taken after completing 5 questions. So I'm going to have this if block here. If question index is less than 4, we will do these operations. Else, here we have the last question. So we don't have to increment the index. Along with these options, we have to update the time taken for this quiz program. So time taken is equal to, we will pass this state property here, time taken. We can even simplify that like this. So this else block will be executed for the last question. So after the fifth question, we have to navigate result component. Sorry, I misspelled this if keyword here. Before getting into the result component, we have to do a few more things inside this quiz component here. Now let's check whether it is working as expected. Let's see the local storage side by side. Now select an answer for this question. Boom. So the question is changed, and also the selected option index and the corresponding question ID is inserted to the local storage. So it's working properly fine. Now let's complete 5 questions. 5 options selected by the participant and the time taken for the quiz program is updated inside the local storage or the context API. So navigation through those questions is working perfectly fine. Here we have forgotten something. For this question, we have an image of a mouse. We want to show that just above this question and below this card header here. So let's do that before moving forward. We want to show the image in between the header and the content. And we will show the image only when there is an image name property for the question. So we can do this. Image name is not equal to null. Then we will show the image here, else null. For showing the image, we can make use of this component card media. The corresponding HTML component will be img. Now with this property image, we have to pass the image URL. So inside this API file here, we have the base URL, right? And we have exported the same here. Now we can make use of that here, base URL. And inside the API, we have a folder called images. Inside that, we have this image with the name given here. Now let me save this and back to the application. Let's reload this page again and again until we find the question. Sorry, image is already showing for questions without image. So here we have to change the condition to not equal to null. Let's reload it until we find the question for the mouse. So here it is. You see, it's not working as we expected. Actually, the image is there inside the folder images with the same name that we have saved inside the DB. In order to solve this problem, first of all, we have to enable static files for this API here. For that, we can go to this program.css here. Now, just below this course configuration, from the app object, call this function use static files. Now into this method, we have to provide the directory where we have saved the static files. So we could do this static file options. File provider is equal to new physical file provider. And let's add the corresponding namespace. Now inside this, we have to pass the directory where we have saved the images. So path.combine method can be called. Now we can make use of this object builder environment.content root path will give the path up to this project directory here. Into that, we just need to append this images, which is the name of this folder here. Now as a second parameter, we have to pass this request path. So this is the route that we want to use for accessing static files inside the folder images here. Now let's build this project. Now let's try it again. Let's try it until we find the question for mouse. Boom, here we go. Now actually here we have to apply some custom CSS to place the image properly. Before that, I want to show you the current state of the context API or local storage. See, here we have a lot of questions as a result of reloading this quiz component here. So let's fix that first. We just need to reset the context API inside this component did mount event here. Set context. Let's pass the object with updated values. So first of all, we have time taken property. Let's assign it with 0 and then the array selected options. So this will do the job. Now I want to do the similar full reset operation of the context API inside this login component here, because we can navigate back to the login component like this. In these cases also things might mess up. So let's do the full reset inside this login component also. So first of all, let's import useEffect. We can make use of this snippet, useEffect snippet. We just need an empty array, and here we can reset the context API and local storage. Now this same operation can be reused in other components. For example, if you want to log out from this application, this reset operation might be helpful. So I'm gonna define the function inside the returned object inside this hook here. Along with this set context, I'm gonna define a function reset context. And this function will be only available if we destructure the property reset context, right? Okay. First of all, let's remove the context from local storage. Now let's reset the state object context. We just need to call this function get fresh context. Now inside this login component, we can destructure this property here. And let's call the same inside this useEffect here. From both of these components, login and quiz, we will reset local storage or context API properties to keep the integrity of data saved from the application. Now back to the mouse image here. So here we have the custom CSS to properly align the image. First of all, I will set the width to auto. Now in order to align the image horizontally in center, I will set top and bottom margin 10 pixel. Horizontally, I will set the margin as auto. So it is working perfectly fine. Now before moving to the result component, we want to show a top navbar here. And inside that navbar, we'll be having a logout button to quit from this quiz application. And this navbar must be available inside this result component also. How can we do that? For that, I will create a new component, layout.js. For the top navbar, you can make use of this material UI component app bar. So first of all, I will add the component here, app bar. I will set the position as sticky. Now inside this, we need this component toolbar. Let's import this app bar component also. For this toolbar, let's set the width same as that of the card. So width is equal to 640 pixel. And let's set the margin as auto so that it will align horizontally in center. Now let's show a heading with the app name quiz app. Variant is H4. So here we have the title quiz app. Now in order to show this app bar for both of these components, this should act as a parent control, right? Or a layout for these components here. That we can easily accomplish with the router. So here we have the router configuration inside the app component. Now let's wrap these two components, quiz and result, with the route layout component. Path is set as a / element is equal to layout component. So here we have the corresponding close tag. Now if you navigate into those two components, you could see the app bar. See? But the actual HTML from the component is not shown. To fix this, we can do this. Just add this tag outlet. So whatever we have inside the targeted component according to the current route will be shown in place of this outlet here. Now this component render method does not allow two outer components. So let's enclose them with React fragment like this. So here we go. You know what, when we use React Material UI components, it's better to enclose everything with this container component. So let's do that here. Now inside this app bar, let me show a logout button. Here we have the click event logout. Let's define the same function here. During logout operation, we just need to clear everything from the context API and we want to navigate into the login form, right? So first of all, I will use the hook for the state context. We just need to import this reset context method, use state context. Now for navigating back to the login form, let's create this navigate object. First of all, let's reset the context. Navigate back to the login form. So here we have the button. Before trying this out, let's align it properly. For that, we just need this custom CSS flex grow is equal to 1. So this heading will take all of the free space and thereby this logout button will push to the right side. Now let's check whether it is working or not. That's it. Now let's check the local storage. So the reset operation is working as we expected. Now let's log in into the application again. Now before moving to the result page, I want to make one more change here. Inside this application here, by default in React Material UI, the default font is Roboto. Instead of that, I really like this font from this Material UI documentation here. If you inspect that, you could see it's called IBM Plex Sans. So let's grab the same from Google Fonts. So here it is. Now we'll select these font weights 300, 400, 500 and 700. Now let's copy this link from here and let's replace the same inside the index.html here. So let's replace the link like this. Now let's change the same inside this global CSS here, index.css. I will set this font as the first option. Back to the application, let's check it is working or not. No, it's not working. If you inspect here, still it is using the font Roboto. So this is by default inside the React Material UI. In order to override this rule, we just need to customize the theme like we have done inside the index.js here. So here we go, typography, and let's reset the default family with this font. Save this, back to the application, reload this. That's it. We can skip this step if you are fine with the default font. Okay, now after these 5 questions, let's navigate into the result component. Here we have the else part, and this is where we have to navigate into the result component. First of all, let's create the navigate object. So here we go, navigate /result. Let's check that here. Boom, that's it. So this is the final component inside the application. Hope you are happy with the progress that we have made. Inside this component, we have to show the score of this quiz program along with the correct answers. In order to calculate the score, first of all, we have to fetch the answer for the attended questions and we want to compare that with the selected options. After all, we have to show each of the questions with their correct answers. That will be discussed in next video. For more React or ASP.NET Code tutorials like this, please consider subscribing to this channel CodAffection. Please like and share this video with your friends and colleagues. See you in next video.